My name is Claire Miller. I'm 35 years old, and I want to tell you the story of how I finally took my life back from a family that treated my love and money as the same thing. It started with a FaceTime call at 3:00 a.m. London time. My mom's face appeared on the screen, tear-streaked, eyes swollen, voice shaking. She begged me to come home for the holidays. "Claire, we need you here. The kids miss you. The whole family, we can't do this without you." For a moment, I almost didn't want to go. I almost said no. But there was a tiny, stubborn part of me that remembered Christmas mornings when she used to hug me like nothing else mattered. I convinced myself this time might be different. 10 hours later, 2 layovers, a dead phone battery, and a back sore from sleeping upright on an airplane, I arrived on her doorstep in San Diego. My suitcase was stuffed with gifts for my brother's kids, and my nerves were frayed. I smelled faintly of airplane coffee, and my legs felt like lead. I rang the bell, secretly hoping for a hug. A real one, something to remind me of when I was a child and the world was simple. The door swung open. My mom didn't hug me. She didn't even say, "How was your flight?" She just stared at my suitcase as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "You'll babysit the kids," she said. "We're going on a family trip." Jason, my brother, stepped into the doorway, sunglasses on, kids hanging off him like ornaments. "Hey guys," he smirked, "don't wipe your snot on Aunt Claire, she's jet-lagged." And then they laughed, all of them, like I was some kind of punchline. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. Something inside me clicked like a switch had finally flipped. I smiled, set my suitcase down, and said one sentence that would change everything. It stopped the laughter. My mom's face drained of color. Jason froze. Even the kids paused mid-spin. But before I tell you exactly what I said, you need to understand how we got here. This wasn't about a missed holiday or a single vacation. For years, my family had relied on me as if I were a bank disguised as a daughter. 2 weeks before the FaceTime call, my mom had already texted me screenshots of holiday prices for resorts, hinting that we could only afford them with a little help from me. "Just this once," she wrote, "it will be fine, just help a little." This was the pattern. Knee surgery, I wired money. Jason's business ran into debt, I covered it. Water heater broke. Mortgage overdue, I fixed it. And when my mom posted brunch photos on social media, the bills I'd paid were quietly erased from the picture. I lived in a tiny flat in London. My salary was modest. I walked in rainstorms, cooked most meals, and yet somehow still covered their streaming services, grocery deliveries, and cell phone bills. And over the years, I realized I was also paying for things I didn't even know I had signed up for. Like a mortgage they had added my name to as a co-borrower years ago. I had been covering it silently, thinking it was just a favor, until it was. So when she begged me on FaceTime, I sat on my bed in London, staring at my banking app, calculating all of the money that had flowed from me to them over the years. Every wire, every transfer, every emergency payment, it added up. The realization hit me like a punch. The only time my family saw me as valuable was when I was paying for something. I almost said no. I almost stayed in London. But then a different thought occurred. If they were willing to drag me across the world to use me as a free babysitter and walking credit card, I was finally willing to show them what it looked like when I stopped playing along. I booked my ticket and quietly a legal consultation. I compiled 3 years of banking statements and drafted a simple agreement to document every transfer. Nothing complicated. Nothing meant to punish, just clarity and accountability. Standing in their doorway in San Diego, I wasn't just tired, I was awake in a way I hadn't been in years. I followed Jason into the kitchen where the glossy resort itinerary was laid out like a promise. Flight times, resort photos, family packages, all bold and bright. My mom tapped the brochure. "See. This is why we need you here, honey. The kids stay with you. We finally have a vacation. You always say we should take care of ourselves." I recognized the card number on the confirmation email open on her phone. My chest tightened. Their dream vacation had been built on my money. And they had assumed I would provide it silently without question. I smiled. "Before we go anywhere, we need to talk about money," I said, calm but firm. Jason groaned. "Claire, seriously," my dad muttered something about timing. My mom gave me that hurt, pleading look. I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet. Each line meticulously color-coded. The mortgage supplements, emergency wire transfers, credit card bailouts, and even small things like streaming services. Every payment I had made for 3 years. The room went silent. Mia and Logan stopped spinning. Jason's smirk vanished. My dad stared at the wall. I scrolled to the total at the bottom. $60,000, $3 years. No, my mom whispered. This can't be right. Yes, I said softly, it is. And it stops now. I handed them the printed agreement I had drafted, showing they acknowledged the transfers and agreed to take responsibility for their own finances. My dad erupted. We're family. You can't just sue your parents. I looked him in the eye. I'm not suing, I'm reclaiming my life. Family doesn't hide a mortgage in their daughter's name. Family doesn't treat her as an ATM and then call her selfish when she finally says no. I clicked to the next tab, the resort confirmation, and as for your vacation, I said, canceled. Because it was paid with my card, not yours, not unless you fund it yourselves. The room froze, the kids looked confused, my mom looked like I'd slapped her, Jason's jaw tightened. I reached for another tab, email from the bank showing me as co-borrower. This, I said, calm as ever, is what happens when you put my name on your mortgage without my knowledge. I am not responsible for your debts any longer. The bank will deal with you directly. I clicked the cancel buttons on the auto payments I had maintained for years, utilities, groceries, streaming services, one by one. Confirmation emails pinged my phone. My mom's breathing grew fast and shallow. My dad muttered, "This is cruel, you're punishing us." No, I said. I am finally living in a world where I am not your safety net. Jason's voice cracked. Claire, please, at least give us time. You're 34, I said. You have kids. You should have been doing this years ago without me dangling in the background. I picked up my suitcase and headed for the door. If my value to you is measured by my money, then I was never really welcome at all. And with that, I stepped outside. The California sun hit my face and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. I called an Uber to take me to my new condo, the one I had quietly purchased months earlier with my own savings. No one knew, no one needed to know. The elevator doors closed behind me, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like I was responsible for anyone else's mistakes. That night I sat cross-legged on the floor of my empty living room, sipping a cup of grocery store coffee. No calls, no guilt, no obligations. Just the soft blinking of my tiny Christmas tree lights and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming my life. For the first time, I understood that family doesn't stop being family when you say no, but some people will reveal themselves for who they really are when you do. And that night, I finally gave myself permission to be my own family first. The Uber rolled through the quiet streets of San Diego, the city lights casting long streaks across the windshield. My suitcase rattled against the trunk with every turn. My fingers drummed nervously against my knee. For years, I had been carrying more than just money. I had carried guilt, expectation, and the invisible weight of a family who only seemed to notice me when the bills were due. Tonight, all of that was finally left behind at the doorstep of the Miller house. When the driver pulled up to my new building, a modern high-rise I'd only seen twice before, I felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. 15 minutes from the old house, but an entire world away. My condo key fob clicked in my hand like a tiny victory, a small sound that had somehow never felt so monumental. I rode the elevator up, dragging my suitcase through the empty hallway, past doors that weren't mine, and finally into the tiny one-bedroom I had bought with my own money months ago. The smell of fresh paint and new carpet greeted me like a soft, forgiving hug. No cooking odors, no tension, no undercurrent of guilt, just me. I dropped my suitcase in the middle of the living room and sank into the corner by the window, staring out at the city lights glittering below. I sipped a cup of instant coffee bought at the corner store and allowed myself the quiet I had been chasing for a decade. No calls, no messages, no emergencies, just me and the hum of the city. I opened my laptop again, partly out of habit, partly to reassure myself that my decisions were right. Emails pinged in rapid succession. Confirmations of canceled auto payments, alerts from utility companies, messages from streaming services. One by one, everything I had been paying for their household disappeared from my life. Disney+, Hulu, Spotify, the shared cloud storage, Apple subscriptions, grocery delivery plans gone. The relief was almost dizzying, but freedom rarely comes without a twinge of doubt. As the quiet settled around me, I began to question myself, had I gone too far? Could they really survive without me? Was I selfish for walking away after years of being their invisible support system? Then I remembered the door, the way my mom had opened it like I was a maid. Jason's laugh at my expense, the kids bouncing off me as if I were part of the furniture, the spreadsheet on my laptop, the mortgage email. Every time I felt a flicker of guilt, I pictured those moments again. That image snapped the doubt out of my chest like a whip. For the next few weeks, I built my life slowly, carefully. I bought a second-hand couch, a fake Christmas tree for the corner, and strung up fairy lights that cast a warm glow over the tiny space. My condo began to feel like a home. Every paycheck went toward things that were mine: groceries, a few small luxuries, and most importantly, savings. I had no one to bail out, no emergencies that weren't mine, and for the first time in years I could breathe. Meanwhile, the Miller house started to unravel in subtle ways. I didn't have to witness it. I could tell through small signs, texts, and the occasional glimpse of social media posts. Designer handbags I had watched my mom flaunt online were gone. She started picking up extra shifts at the office, telling me quietly that she was trying to make ends meet without me. Jason had moved into a smaller apartment, the kids sharing a bedroom for the first time in years. He sent me a text one night, short and reluctant, trying to figure out how much it really costs to run a house. Didn't realize it was this bad. I smiled at the text and didn't reply immediately. Part of me wanted to leap back into the role I had abandoned, to rescue them once again. But I reminded myself of the reason I had flown home in the first place: to stop being their invisible bank account and unpaid babysitter. The first sign that my actions were having real consequences came from my mom, of all people. One gray Tuesday morning, she knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw her clutching a reusable grocery bag, her posture smaller, almost apologetic. I opened the door. "Claire," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She stepped inside, scanning the modest condo as if it were a museum exhibit. I didn't know it looked like this. I shrugged. "This is what I can afford when I'm not paying for two households." Her eyes filled with tears. She reached into the grocery bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check. Not the full $62,000, not even close, but something tangible. "It's from selling things, some old jewelry, bags, that coffee table you hated," she said, her voice breaking. "And I've been picking up extra shifts. It's not much, but it's a start." I studied the check for a long moment, then looked at her. "It's not about the amount," I said. "It's about the fact that for once, the money is pointing the other way." She sat on the edge of the couch, crying quietly this time, not the manipulative sobbing from the 3 a.m. FaceTime. The kind of crying that comes from realizing you've been wrong for years. "Your father, he still says you betrayed us," she whispered. "That you turned on the family because of money." I shook my head. "I didn't turn on anyone. I stopped pretending that the money wasn't mine to begin with. I stopped being your emergency fund, your free babysitter, that's all." She nodded, wiping her face. "Do you think maybe someday we could have a Christmas where it's just dinner? No bills, no hidden debts, no spreadsheets?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe," I said, "but only if everyone understands I'm not your backup anymore. If I come, it's because I want to, not because I'm paying the price for everyone else." She hugged me, properly this time. I felt the warmth that had been missing for so long, a tangible reminder that family doesn't have to mean self-sacrifice to the point of erasure. For weeks afterward, I stayed in my routine. I focused on work, decorating my condo, and keeping my life small and manageable. I resisted the urge to check on them constantly, to answer every frantic message or social media post. My dad's online posts kept coming, vague but stinging. "Sometimes the ones you raise fly off and forget what really matters." I ignored them. They were for an audience that didn't know the truth, and I wasn't interested in proving anything. My receipts, my advisor, my records, they were proof enough. The real test came when Jason finally reached out, timid and exhausted. He wanted to meet for coffee. He arrived, dark circles under his eyes, stubble shadowing his jaw, a delivery bag slung over his shoulder. He sat across from me and exhaled. "Dad needs to shut up online," he began. "Those posts are making everything worse, and I know you're mad, but the letters, the bank notices, you did something right." I sipped my coffee slowly. "I stopped pretending," I said. "I made sure my name was safe. The bank and utility companies know who's actually paying for what." He nodded, relieved but still cautious. I'm actually seeing what stuff costs, like really seeing it. Groceries, daycare bills, I didn't get it before, but now I understand. I've picked up extra shifts, sold some of my old gear, downsized the apartment. It sucks, but at least it's real." Meanwhile, my mom continued her quiet efforts to claw back some control over her life. Designer handbags disappeared from her posts, replaced by modest finds at discount stores. The large flat-screen television, a constant symbol of extravagance, vanished from the living room one morning, replaced by a boxy hand-me-down from the garage. I never reached out to my dad, never explained anything. The vague posts, the public complaints, the Facebook pity party, they were his to manage. My role was done. My spreadsheets, my canceled auto-pays, and my condo were all the proof I needed that I had finally claimed my independence. By the time the next Christmas rolled around, the Miller house felt like a different universe, and so did mine. I decorated my tiny space with care, bought a few second-hand ornaments, and strung the cheap fairy lights around the tree. I worked, I built my portfolio, and I finally allowed myself to enjoy my own version of the holidays. And then, just when I had settled into my peace, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart raced, a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. I opened the peephole and froze. My mom, clutching a grocery bag to her chest like a shield, stood outside. I opened the door slowly. My mom's eyes were wide, filled with a mix of guilt and hope. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of years spent relying on me to prop up a household that wasn't hers to manage. The grocery bag in her hand seemed like a shield, a tiny attempt to carry a portion of the world she had ignored for far too long. "Claire," she said softly, her voice trembling, "can I come in?" I hesitated, measuring her. The old part of me, the one trained to jump at the first sign of regret, twitched. But the spreadsheet, the canceled payments, the mortgage email, they all reminded me why I had flown home and walked back out. Slowly, I stepped aside. She shuffled into my tiny living room, setting the bag down on the floor with a careful thump. The smell of stale bread and packaged groceries wafted upward, starkly different from the smells of the luxury dinners I had been financing for years. She took a tentative step toward the couch, glancing at my mismatched decorations, the tiny fake tree with its blinking fairy lights, and the second-hand couch that somehow made the room feel warmer than anything I'd owned in London. "I didn't know it looked like this," she said again, voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged. "This is what I can afford without covering 2 households." She nodded slowly, swallowing hard. Then she reached into the grocery bag and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. Inside was a check, not the full amount I had been owed, not even close, but a start. "I sold some things," she said quickly, her eyes filling with tears. "Jewelry, handbags, that coffee table you hated, and I've been picking up extra shifts. It's not much, but it's something." It's a start." I looked at the check, then at her. For a moment I just let the quiet between us stretch. The amount didn't matter, the acknowledgement did. This was the first time she had admitted aloud that she had been using me, that my money had been keeping a fantasy afloat. "It's not about the amount," I said finally. "It's about the fact that for once the money is pointing the other way." She sank onto the edge of the couch, tears spilling quietly down her cheeks. Not the loud, manipulative sobbing I remembered from the FaceTime call. Quiet, broken, and human. "Your father, he still says you betrayed us," she whispered. "That you turned on the family because of money." I shook my head. "I didn't turn on anyone. I stopped pretending the money wasn't mine. I stopped being your emergency fund, your free babysitter, your invisible bank, that's all." She nodded again, wiping her face. "Do you think maybe someday we could have a Christmas where it's just dinner? No spreadsheets, no hidden debts." I let out a small laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in years. "Maybe. But only if everyone understands I'm not their safety net anymore. If I come, it's because I want to, not because I'm expected to pay for what you can't handle." She stood and hugged me, properly this time, a hug that filled the void I had been chasing for decades. Over the next few weeks, my condo became my sanctuary. I focused on building my own routines, my work, and my life. I decorated slowly, savoring every moment. Each item I purchased, each piece of furniture set in place, was a reminder that I no longer lived for someone else's convenience. My money, my time, my energy, all mine. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of my decisions began to unfold back at the Miller house. I didn't have to witness every misstep, the signs were everywhere. My mom's social media posts shifted from the flashy boutique finds to modest purchases. Designer handbags vanished from the feed. The luxury flat-screen television, a symbol of extravagance and excess, disappeared one morning, replaced by a hand-me-down from the garage. The household I had been propping up quietly began to wobble under its own weight. Jason sent me messages, tentative at first. One night he showed up at my door, dark circles under his eyes, stubble lining his jaw, and a delivery bag slung over his shoulder. He sat across from me and exhaled. "Dad, he needs to stop posting online," he began. "The comments, the pity party, it's making everything worse." "I know you're mad, but the letters, the bank notices, you handled it, right?" I sipped my coffee, letting him sit in the tension. "I made sure my name is safe. The bank and utility companies know who is responsible. That's all I did, the rest is on them." He nodded slowly, relief mixing with lingering guilt. I finally get what it costs to run a house. Groceries, bills, daycare, I didn't understand before. Now I see. I've picked up extra shifts, sold some gear, downsized the apartment. It's not easy, but it's real. It was strange, watching him shrink without the sarcasm that had always inflated him. He looked smaller, humbled, finally seeing the consequences of choices he had been shielded from by my money. Meanwhile, my mom continued her quiet adjustments. She picked up extra work shifts, sold unused items, and slowly rebuilt a sense of responsibility. There were moments of tension, messages from my dad. Vague online posts about betrayal and selfish children, but she began to realize that the fantasy lifestyle they had maintained was unsustainable without my invisible support. I never defended myself online or to anyone else. The posts, the rumors, the pity parties, they were for the audience. I had my proof: spreadsheets, emails, receipts, and bank statements. That was enough. By the time the next Christmas approached, my life had shifted completely. I decorated my condo modestly, bought small ornaments, and strung cheap fairy lights across the tree. I worked steadily, focusing on my portfolio and my projects. For the first time, the holidays felt like they belonged to me, not a backdrop for someone else's vacation plans or financial dramas. Then on a rainy December afternoon, there was a knock at my door. My stomach tightened. Through the peephole, I saw my mom again, clutching another grocery bag. She looked smaller, more human, stripped of the pretense and extravagance that had always defined her. I opened the door. She looked around the condo slowly, taking in the small couch, the blinking tree, the modest decorations. "I didn't know it looked like this," she said softly. I shrugged. "This is what I can afford without paying for two households." Her eyes shimmered with tears. She reached into the grocery bag and pulled out an envelope. I tried to make it right," she said. "It's not everything, but it's something. Selling things, extra shifts, it's a start." I studied the envelope, the check inside. It wasn't about the money, it was the acknowledgement. The first time she had admitted her reliance on me. "It's not about the amount," I said. "It's about the fact that for once the flow is pointing the other way." She sat down, letting the quiet stretch between us. Her tears were soft, genuine, unlike the dramatic calls from before. "Your father, he still says you betrayed us," she whispered. I shook my head. "I didn't betray anyone. I stopped pretending the money wasn't mine. I stopped being the invisible safety net." She nodded. Maybe someday we could have a Christmas where it's just dinner, no spreadsheets, no bills." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But only if everyone understands I'm not their backup anymore. If I come, it's because I want to, not because I'm expected to rescue them." She hugged me, real human, lasting. A quiet acknowledgement that things were changing. The following days passed in calm repetition. I worked, organized my space, and reveled in the absence of financial obligations I didn't consent to. I stopped checking social media obsessively. I didn't respond to my dad's vague complaints. I let my mom and Jason figure out their own reality. And in the quiet of my condo, I finally felt the peace I had been chasing for years. The days after my mom's visit were quiet, almost unnervingly so. No calls from my dad, no frantic texts from Jason, just the hum of the city outside my windows and the soft clatter of my own life unfolding. It felt strange at first to not be in the middle of someone else's chaos. I could make decisions, take time for myself, and not calculate the financial consequences for three other adults who had grown accustomed to me as a walking safety net. I found myself smiling at little things: the way sunlight hit the corner of my living room in the morning, the faint scent of my cheap grocery store coffee, and the way the fairy lights on my tiny Christmas tree reflected off the windows. It was my life now, small and imperfect, but mine. Jason texted occasionally, short, clipped updates about how the household was adjusting. They had to reassess the mortgage, refinance some debts, and deal with overdue bills that had piled up over years. He was learning, slowly, that adulthood was messy and unforgiving. There was a certain satisfaction in watching him, not from a place of cruelty, but from the relief of finally being free from his mistakes and their weight. He was figuring it out without me. One evening, as I was finishing dinner in my new kitchen, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. Claire, they came today from the bank. They asked for all the updated documents. I finally understand how bad it was. We're actually facing reality. Thank you for making me see this. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. The acknowledgement was small, but it was progress. She wasn't asking me to intervene, wasn't asking for a bailout. She was accepting responsibility. That more than any check or apology was the thing I had been waiting for. Weeks passed, and the ripple effect of my departure became more visible. The once pristine driveway of the Miller house was lined with notices and letters. The truck that had been a constant fixture in their driveway, a symbol of my unspoken support, was repossessed. Their expensive brunches and weekend trips slowed, designer bags disappeared. The illusion of financial comfort they had maintained for years without working for it, without earning it themselves, began to crumble. Jason called me one night, voice low and serious. Claire, Dad's lost it. He's furious about the bank letters, the mortgage reassessment. Mom is trying to calm him down, but it's messy. I didn't respond immediately. There was no rush. I had already set my boundaries, and he was finally learning the consequences of relying on me. I'm glad it's happening, I said finally. It's about time someone saw the reality. There was a long pause. Yeah, I guess, but it's scary, seeing the house, everything, it's a lot to take in. Good, I said, it should be. They need to learn, you need to learn, it's not my responsibility anymore. The next few weeks were a strange mix of freedom and guilt. I kept busy at work, decorating my condo, and slowly adjusting to a life where I wasn't constantly juggling emergencies. My mom sent me small updates, grocery receipts, confirmations of bills being paid, little notes of progress. She was learning, she was finally trying. Then one rainy afternoon I received a call from Jason. His voice sounded smaller, almost defeated. Claire, the kids, they asked about you, they miss you. I told them you're busy with work. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to jump back into the role I had left, to be the aunt, the helper, the one they could rely on without question. But I reminded myself of the doorway, the suitcase, the spreadsheet, and the mortgage email. I was done being their invisible support system. I know they miss me, I said slowly. But I'm not their babysitter anymore. They're going to be fine, you're going to be fine, Mom's going to be fine. You all need to live your lives without me as the safety net. There was a long silence. Yeah, I guess you're right, he said finally. Christmas approached, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't planning a flight, gifts, or childcare duties. I decorated my condo modestly, bought a few ornaments from a local store, and strung cheap fairy lights across the tiny tree. I brewed hot chocolate in my small kitchen, poured it into a chipped mug, and sat cross-legged on the floor listening to the city hum outside. It was peaceful, quiet, mine. On Christmas Eve, I decided to bake cookies, a simple recipe, cheap ingredients, but the process was mine. Flour on my hands, chocolate chips melting into the dough, the smell of sugar and butter filling the tiny space. No one to critique, no one to demand, no one to rely on me for anything other than myself. When the cookies were done, I set them on the windowsill to cool and sat back, sipping my hot chocolate. My phone buzzed, a text from my mom. Claire, I think we're starting to get it. Jason's been working late nights. We're actually paying bills on time. The kids are adjusting. The house, it's different but better. Thank you. I smiled, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The acknowledgement, the slow shift, was what I had been waiting for all along. They were finally facing reality without me. I had finally stopped being the invisible lifeline. The night grew quiet, and I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. For the first time, I didn't feel obligated to anyone. No calls, no emergency transfers, no guilt trips, just me, just my life. And in that quiet, I realized something I had never allowed myself to see before. Freedom wasn't loud or dramatic. It was small. It was mundane. It was sitting alone on a Christmas Eve, drinking hot chocolate, knowing that for the first time in years I was truly free. I didn't know what the next year would bring. Maybe my dad would finally face reality. Maybe Jason would finally take responsibility without me stepping in. Maybe my mom would continue to adjust, slowly learning to live within her means. But that was their journey, not mine. For the first time, I could focus on myself, build my career, decorate my home, celebrate the holidays without guilt. And most importantly, I could finally breathe. The first week of January felt like a fresh start. My condo, still smelling faintly of fresh paint and coffee, had taken on the comfort of a home. I unpacked the last of my boxes, placed a few personal trinkets on the shelves, and even managed to find space for a small desk where I could work on my UX projects without interruption. No one was waiting for me to transfer money, wire emergency funds, or cancel overdue bills. For the first time in years, the calendar belonged to me. Work picked up immediately. Projects that had been piling up while I was juggling my family's needs were now manageable. I stayed late one night watching the city lights blink below me and realized something startling. I wasn't stressed. I wasn't exhausted. My shoulders weren't tense from carrying responsibilities that weren't mine. I had time, energy, and mental space to focus on myself, and it felt revolutionary. Jason called one afternoon, hesitant, almost like he was stepping on thin ice. "Hey, I just wanted to say thanks," he said. His voice sounded different, lighter but nervous. "For everything you did, I mean, for showing me what was really going on. I am actually trying to keep up with the bills now. Mom's helping too." I let a small smile play at my lips. "You're welcome," I said. "I'm glad you're starting to see how it all works. That's all I wanted." He hesitated. "I know you're busy and I don't want to bother you, but do you think maybe, sometime, we could have dinner?" "Just the four of us," I paused, remembering the years of imbalance, the spreadsheet, the 3 a.m. FaceTime call, the canceled resort trips. I remembered the quiet victory of my first Christmas alone, where I realized peace was not about being needed, it was about being free. "Maybe," I said finally. "But only if everyone understands that it's not about the money anymore. I'm not coming to rescue anyone. I'll come if I want to, not because I owe anyone anything." There was a long silence. "Yeah, I think we can do that," he said finally. I hung up and let the quiet settle again. That was progress, slowly, carefully, on my terms. Life in my condo began to feel normal, real in a way it never had before. I learned the small, mundane joys that came with independence. Cooking meals just for me, rearranging furniture without consulting anyone, sleeping in a bed I had paid for myself. The little things mattered. I even started a small balcony garden with herbs and a couple of potted flowers. Every morning, watering them became a ritual that reminded me I was nurturing my life, not someone else's. One Saturday, I treated myself to a thrift store run. I picked up mismatched mugs, a second-hand lamp, and a small bookshelf. It felt indulgent, but in a way that had nothing to do with impressing anyone. It was just for me. That evening, I brewed tea in one of the mugs, curled up with a blanket, and worked on a design project. I realized that, for the first time, I was building a life I wanted to live, not a life I was expected to maintain for the convenience of others. My mom continued to reach out occasionally, sending texts about bills, the kids, and updates on her own progress. She was learning to manage, and the small changes were visible. She sold off excess furniture, adjusted her spending habits, and even started a small side hustle that allowed her to feel capable. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying, and crucially, she was no longer expecting me to bail her out at every turn. Jason continued his late-night shifts, sending occasional texts about how he and the kids were managing. He was learning responsibility in real time, and I watched it unfold from a distance without stepping in. The kids asked about me, and I remembered the tug in my chest, the instinct to rescue them. But I didn't. I realized that my love for them didn't require me to sacrifice my life for their comfort. By mid-January, the reality of the Miller house was fully settling in. I began to hear through mutual friends and social media that the household was experiencing real consequences for the first time in years. Letters from the bank, overdue bills, and mounting utility notices were creating pressure that no one could ignore. My dad, predictably, continued his online lamentations about betrayal and ungrateful children, but his audience was shrinking. The fantasy of family loyalty built on my money was collapsing. One afternoon, I received a message from my mom, unusually detailed. "Claire, we're doing okay. Jason's working long hours, the kids are adjusting, and I've been paying bills on time. It's hard, but it's real. I think we're finally learning to manage without you. Thank you for showing us what was really happening." I smiled and typed back, "I'm glad you're learning." That was the point, keep going. The acknowledgement felt heavier than any apology. She wasn't asking me to return to my old role. She was taking responsibility, and for the first time I felt the subtle satisfaction of distance, not detachment but clarity. By February, my condo had become a true home. I hosted a small gathering for friends, celebrating my first major success at work, and relished the freedom to decorate and prepare without worrying about anyone else's expectations. The night was simple: cheap wine, easy snacks, laughter, and no tension. For the first time in years, the holidays and life felt like they belonged to me. Jason sent a text later that night. "Claire, thanks for showing us how to manage. Mom's trying, I'm trying. It's hard, but we're starting to get it. Don't feel guilty." "You did what you had to do." I stared at the screen for a long moment, no anger, no resentment, just acknowledgement. It was enough. One morning, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The early FaceTime calls, the emergency transfers, the invisible weight of their financial dependence. It had all led me here. To independence, to peace, to understanding that love and responsibility were not the same as self-erasure. I began journaling more, documenting my journey, not for anyone else but for me. Each entry reminded me of how far I had come and how much I had reclaimed. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. My energy, my money, my time finally belonged to me. Even the minor holidays became moments of freedom. Valentine's Day, small dinners with friends, movie nights alone or with colleagues, these were celebrations on my terms. I could invest in myself, learn, travel, and grow without being tethered to the expectations of a family that had long treated me as an invisible resource. The distance I had created had done more than protect my finances. It had allowed me to heal emotionally. I could see my parents and brother clearly now, without the fog of guilt clouding my judgment. I could care without being consumed. I could love without being exploited. By March, the consequences for my family were fully visible. The Miller household had tightened its belts. My mom's side hustle was generating a small supplemental income. Jason had learned to budget and handle his children's needs without relying on me. The house was still standing, but the fantasy lifestyle was gone. The lessons were hard, but they were real. I was no longer their ATM, their unpaid babysitter, or the invisible force keeping the house afloat. I was Claire, independent, capable, and finally free to live my own life. That month, I treated myself to a small vacation. Nothing extravagant, just a long weekend in a nearby coastal town. I rented a tiny Airbnb, walked along the beach, and watched the sunset over the water. I realized as the waves lapped at my feet that freedom was not about grandeur, it was about choice. About breathing without guilt, about living for oneself without sacrificing sanity or self-respect. I texted my mom once during the trip. "Wish you were here to see this sunset," I wrote. Her reply came quickly. "I can imagine it. Thank you for showing us how to handle things. I'm learning, really learning." I smiled, slipping my phone into my bag. The acknowledgement was small but enough. The distance, the boundaries, the decisions I had made, they were finally bearing fruit. By April, I was thriving. Work was rewarding, my condo was finally feeling like home, and my life was my own. I had learned to navigate the delicate balance of family love and personal boundaries. I knew my parents and brother were still adjusting, still learning, still facing consequences, but it was their journey, not mine. I reflected often on the doorway that had changed everything: the suitcase, the spreadsheet, the canceled resort trip. It had been terrifying at the time, but it had been necessary. It had been the first act of courage in reclaiming my life. I was no longer living for anyone else. My money, my energy, my time, they belonged to me. And for the first time in decades, I felt a profound, unshakable peace. Spring arrived slowly in San Diego, carrying a softness that seemed almost intentional, as if the city itself was acknowledging the new rhythm of my life. My mornings began with sunlight spilling into my living room, the faint smell of coffee mingling with the scent of my tiny balcony garden. Life had become a series of small rituals that were mine alone: watering the herbs, planning meals, logging UX projects, and occasionally baking something indulgent just because I wanted to. No one was asking me to fix their problems, to wire them money, or to smooth over financial disasters I hadn't caused. For the first time, my decisions truly mattered to me and me alone. It was around mid-March that I finally sat down with a notebook and sketched out a real plan for my life. Not just survival, not just paying off my own bills and being independent, but long-term growth, stability, and joy. I had been so focused on untangling myself from the Miller family's financial web that I hadn't considered what I actually wanted for myself. Now I could. The first page was simple: financial independence. I listed savings goals, emergency funds, investment accounts, and credit consolidation. I plotted a timeline for paying off small debts I had taken on while helping the family in past years, debts I had carried in silence. Seeing it all laid out, I felt a strange, liberating thrill. This wasn't a spreadsheet to hold someone else accountable, it was a roadmap for reclaiming myself. Next, I wrote about my career. UX work had always been my passion, but I had been sacrificing opportunities for projects in Europe, freelance collaborations, and workshops because I was constantly distracted by family crises. Now, with no one else depending on me financially, I could commit fully to expanding my skills, taking on new clients, and building a portfolio that reflected my capabilities, not my willingness to bail others out. Finally, I wrote about relationships. I realized that the family I had grown up with, though it shared my blood, had conditioned me to feel guilty for saying no. They had trained me to measure love in financial support and availability. That was not a model I wanted to continue. I wanted relationships based on mutual respect, honesty, and choice, not obligation. Jason texted one evening, "Claire, Mom's asking if you'll come over next weekend. She says she wants to cook dinner, just us, no money talk." I stared at the screen. My heart did a strange little flip. Part of me wanted to dive back in, to be the daughter who had spent decades smoothing over mistakes, covering debts, and making life easier for everyone else. But I paused and remembered the doorway, the spreadsheet, the canceled resort trip, and the mortgage email. I remembered the strange, quiet thrill of finally standing up for myself, of asserting boundaries I had ignored for years. I typed back, "I'll come, but on my terms, I'm coming for dinner." Not to pay bills, not to fix anything, just to be me. When I arrived that Saturday, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. My mom greeted me with a tentative smile, Jason with a subdued nervousness, and the kids, Mia and Logan, with an innocent, excited energy that reminded me how much I had always loved them. But this time there was no expectation, no unspoken demand, no invisible ledger of debts I owed them. Dinner was quiet at first, filled with the sounds of cutlery, soft laughter, and casual conversation. My mom had cooked something simple, nothing extravagant. Jason had made a salad. The kids had set the table in their usual chaotic style, and for the first time I felt present, not responsible, not obligated, just there. After dessert, my mom reached across the table. "Claire, thank you," she said softly. "Not for the money, not for anything else, just for being honest, for giving us the chance to see reality." "I think we're finally learning," I nodded, feeling a strange warmth spread through me. "You're learning," I said. "That's what matters, keep going." By April, my routine was firmly established. Mornings spent with coffee and planning, afternoons at work or on projects, evenings walking along the boardwalk or experimenting with small creative projects in the condo. I even started a small exercise routine, jogging along the waterfront a few mornings a week, relishing the simple fact that I could do it for me. The Miller family's financial situation had stabilized, though the lessons were hard. Jason had downsized, sold some belongings, and was working extra hours. My mom had started budgeting rigorously, even setting up her own spreadsheet for the first time. They were learning, painfully, that adulthood required planning and accountability. And I was no longer the invisible lifeline they depended on. One afternoon, a realization struck me. I had been so focused on untangling myself from their financial web that I had forgotten to truly live for myself. Now, with that freedom firmly in place, I began to explore hobbies I had abandoned, trips I had delayed, and friendships I had neglected. I enrolled in a local art class, something I had always loved but never prioritized. I started going to weekend markets, exploring neighborhoods in San Diego I had never seen. I even began volunteering occasionally at a community tech workshop, sharing my UX knowledge with young students. Each step was small, but it was mine, and it mattered in a way that nothing had in years. One evening, I received a call from Emma, my close friend in London. "You're glowing, Claire," she said. "I can tell something's changed," I laughed softly. "I'm finally living for myself, no guilt, no invisible burdens, no constant crises. It's freeing." She paused. "And what about your family?" "Your dad, Jason, Mom," I took a deep breath. "They're learning, slowly, but this time it's on their terms, and for the first time I'm okay with that. I've set boundaries and I'm sticking to them." As spring turned to early summer, I began planning a short solo trip, a chance to truly disconnect and reflect on how far I had come. I booked a long weekend in a coastal town, renting a small, modest Airbnb. I spent my days walking along the beach, journaling and sketching ideas for future UX projects. It was not an extravagant vacation. There were no fancy resorts, no family obligations, no crises to manage. It was just me, the ocean, and the horizon. On the last evening of the trip, I watched the sun sink into the water, painting the sky with colors I had almost forgotten existed. The feeling of liberation, of unburdened peace, was overwhelming. For the first time, I realized the full magnitude of what I had achieved: independence, clarity, and self-respect. I texted my mom, "Wish you could see this sunset." Her reply was immediate: "I can imagine it. Thank you for showing us how to handle things. I'm learning." Really learning? I smiled, slipping my phone into my bag, a small acknowledgement, but enough. The distance I had created had allowed me to heal and grow. By June, I was thriving professionally and personally. Work projects had expanded, my condo had become a sanctuary, and my social life was full of genuine connections. The Miller family continued to adjust to their new reality, slowly but surely taking responsibility for their finances and decisions. I reflected often on the doorway moment, the suitcase, the spreadsheet, the canceled resort trip. It had been terrifying, necessary, and transformative. That one act of courage had set me on a path toward reclaiming my life. I was no longer living for anyone else. My money, my energy, my time, they belonged to me. And for the first time in decades, I felt a profound, unshakable peace. Summer had arrived in full force, and the city felt alive in a way that mirrored my own life. Sunlight spilled through my condo windows, warming the pale walls, and the soft scent of my herbs mingled with the ocean breeze drifting in through the open balcony door. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of rhythm, of normalcy, and of ownership over every single minute of my day. I had fallen into a comfortable routine. Mornings began with coffee on the balcony, journal in hand, where I mapped out the day, sketched ideas for UX projects, and reflected on the slow progress I was making emotionally. Work filled my afternoons, and evenings were for friends, hobbies, or long walks along the waterfront. There was no guilt pulling me in 1,000 directions, no emergencies waiting for me in a distant state, no invisible ledger of debts and favors. It was just me. One morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Emma, my friend from London. "Claire, I swear I can see a difference in you. You're glowing." Like really glowing, I laughed softly, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I guess I finally stopped trying to keep everyone else afloat at the expense of myself." She paused. "And your family? Are you okay with them?" I thought about the spreadsheet, the doorway confrontation, the canceled resort, and the long months of quiet growth and boundaries. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm okay with them. They're learning, slowly, but this is my life now, not theirs." Emma's response was immediate: "Good." That's the Claire I knew could survive anything. By mid-July, I had begun expanding my social life in ways I hadn't in years. I attended local tech meetups, creative workshops, and small networking events. For the first time, I was forming connections based purely on mutual interest and respect, not obligation or familial expectations. I met people who challenged me, inspired me, and encouraged me to think beyond the limited horizon I had been trapped in. One evening, after a particularly inspiring UX seminar, I walked home along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting in the calm water. I realized how different my life felt from even a year ago. Back then, I would have been planning flights, arranging babysitters, and calculating emergency transfers for my parents and Jason. Now I was walking alone, breathing freely, feeling the cool air on my skin without a single responsibility weighing on my chest. It struck me then that freedom wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, quiet, and persistent. It was small victories accumulated over months of careful boundary setting. It was independence measured not in confrontation, but in the simple act of living life for yourself. Family communication had shifted dramatically since the doorway confrontation months earlier. My mom continued to text occasionally, updates about bills, grocery shopping, and the kids, but the tone was different. She was no longer asking me to fix problems. She was sharing, trying, and acknowledging mistakes without guilt-tripping me. Jason called one evening, voice low and uncertain. "Claire, I wanted to thank you, really, for the spreadsheet, for showing us how to handle things. We're learning, slowly, but we're learning." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "That's all I wanted," I said. "Keep it up, you're capable." There was a pause. "I know, it's just weird, suddenly having to be responsible. Having to handle everything we used to depend on you for." "Good," I said softly. "You needed to see reality. You're going to be stronger for it." By late July, I had settled fully into a rhythm that was mine alone. I started a small side project, a UX portfolio site with interactive designs, tutorials, and case studies. I poured my creativity into it, experimenting with color palettes, layouts, and micro-interactions that reflected my own aesthetic rather than a client's. Every time I added a new project, I felt a surge of pride, a reminder that this was work I had chosen on my terms for me. The Miller family's adjustments continued in parallel, though I mostly observed from a distance. My mom's budgeting efforts were paying off. Jason had downsized, taken on more shifts, and was learning the intricacies of balancing work, parenting, and finances. The kids were thriving in their smaller apartment, sharing a room and learning to adapt without my intervention. And my dad, well, he was still posting occasional complaints online about betrayal and ungrateful children, but his audience was shrinking. And the one-stance dynamic was softening into something more realistic. I had no desire to intervene. Part of me expected conflict or guilt-tripping to resurface, but it didn't. The family had finally begun facing reality, and I had withdrawn from being their crutch. It was strange to watch, almost surreal but deeply satisfying. By August, I began exploring personal growth beyond work and social life. I started attending weekend workshops on mindfulness and meditation, discovering a stillness I hadn't allowed myself in years. Sitting cross-legged on my balcony, the city stretched out before me, I realized that I was no longer living reactively. I was choosing intentionally what mattered. I was present in my own life, not lost in the emergencies of others. One afternoon, I received a small package from my mom. Inside were a few handmade crafts the kids had made and a note, "Claire, we miss you, but we're proud of you. Keep living your life. You've shown us what independence looks like." I smiled, tears threatening but controlled. The acknowledgement was genuine. No guilt, no manipulation, just recognition. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a financial lifeline, but as a person. By September, I had fully embraced my independence. My condo was a true reflection of my life, cozy, personalized, and alive with creativity. I hosted small gatherings, attended workshops, explored new neighborhoods, and continued expanding my professional portfolio. Each day reinforced the fact that freedom was not just the absence of obligation, but the presence of choice. The Miller family continued to adjust, slowly but steadily. They were learning responsibility, experiencing consequences, and finally acknowledging the realities they had long ignored. And I, for the first time, could watch without guilt, without anxiety, and without the compulsion to intervene. One evening, as the sun set over the city, I reflected on the journey, the 3 a.m. FaceTime call, the suitcase at the door, the spreadsheet, the canceled resort, and the mortgage confrontation, all of it had led me here. To independence, to clarity, to peace. I realized something profound. Love and responsibility were not the same as self-erasure. I could care deeply for my family and still prioritize myself. I could love without being consumed. I could be generous without being exploited. And in that quiet reflection, I understood that the freedom I had fought so hard to reclaim was not temporary or conditional. It was permanent, built on months of courage, boundaries, and deliberate choices. It was mine, and no one could take it away. By October, the rhythm of my life in San Diego had taken on a steadiness I hadn't known in years. My condo, once a bare shell with just the essentials, had become a sanctuary. A second-hand couch, a small bookshelf lined with UX design references, scattered sketches, and tiny plants thrived in corners, bringing life to every surface. The city outside my window pulsed with energy, but inside I had carved out a space entirely my own, quiet, manageable, and free from the constant obligations that had defined my adulthood for so long. Work had reached a new level of focus and productivity. I had begun consulting for a mid-sized startup on redesigning their user interface, a project that demanded creativity, insight, and long-term engagement. Gone were the distractions of family emergencies and invisible debt obligations. I could dedicate my full attention to something I truly cared about. Each design I produced felt like a reflection of my own voice, not someone else's expectations, but independence wasn't just about work. I spent weekends walking along the coastline, my headphones in, playlists tuned to reflect the moods of the city and my own thoughts. I had begun keeping a small journal where I sketched ideas for future career moves, personal projects, and even small adventures I wanted to take. Each page felt like reclaiming time that had been stolen from me in previous years by guilt and manipulation. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Jason. "Hey, we're doing okay." Slowly. "Mom says hi, can I ask you something?" I hesitated, considering how much engagement I wanted. Then I typed back, "Sure, what's up?" He replied, "Would you be willing to help us set up a proper budget? Not for us to lean on you, just a plan so we don't crash again." I paused, thinking. My first instinct was to say no. But then I remembered the difference between helping someone learn and being a permanent crutch. "Yes," I replied, "but this is a one-time coaching session. I'll show you how to do it yourselves. You implement it, I'm not funding it." He responded quickly, "Understood, thank you." That Saturday, I visited their apartment for the first time since the confrontation months earlier. The place was smaller than their previous home, but it was clean, organized, and functional. Mia and Logan ran to greet me, smiling and energetic, without the expectation that I had come to babysit or pay for something. It felt normal. I sat down with Jason and my mom at the small kitchen table. I pulled out a blank notebook and began mapping out their monthly income, expenses, and priorities. I emphasized the importance of separating wants from needs, setting aside funds for emergencies, and creating a sustainable routine. "This isn't about control," I said, "or about proving who's right. It's about making sure you can manage your finances without me." We spent 3 hours working through their budget, and by the end, there was a sense of quiet accomplishment. They had a plan, and for the first time, it was theirs, not something I imposed or funded. As I left, Mia hugged me tightly. "Thanks for helping us, Aunt Claire," she whispered. "We didn't know how to do it," I smiled. "Now you do." Back in my condo, I reflected on the progress. My family was learning accountability, and I had reclaimed my life. But more than that, I was beginning to think about the future in ways I hadn't allowed myself before. I wanted to continue growing professionally, creatively, and personally. The thought of building a life entirely untethered from obligations I hadn't chosen was exhilarating. I began planning a professional development path. I registered for advanced UX design workshops, enrolled in online courses for emerging technologies, and started a small side project, a mobile app prototype I had been dreaming of for years. The app wasn't just a portfolio piece, it was a passion project, an intersection of design, usability, and personal interest. Each night I spent refining wireframes, testing interactions, and iterating on user feedback felt like reclaiming not just my time, but my professional identity. As November approached, I began receiving subtle updates from my family. My mom sent occasional texts. "We managed the electricity bill ourselves this month." "No problems." Jason shared photos of the kids doing homework in their smaller apartment, smiling and engaged. These weren't pleas for help, they were updates about progress. Small, quiet, and meaningful. One Sunday, I received a surprising text from my mom. "Claire, can you come over? I made Thanksgiving dinner for us, no expectation. Just food and family." I hesitated, remembering past holidays filled with tension, financial guilt, and obligations. But this time felt different. This time I had clarity and control. I typed back, "I'll come, just dinner, no expectations." Thanksgiving arrived with the quiet warmth of small, deliberate preparation. My mom had cooked a simple meal: roast chicken, vegetables, and a modest pumpkin pie. Jason had baked a bread loaf. The kids had set the table with mismatched plates, giggling at their own creativity. Sitting around that table, I realized how drastically the dynamics had shifted. There was no tension, no hidden agenda, no expectation that I would fund or fix anything. We shared food, conversation, and laughter, simple, genuine connection. After dinner, my mom reached across the table and said softly, "Thank you, Claire. Not for the money, not for anything else, just for being honest, for giving us a chance to see reality." I smiled, the warmth spreading through me. "You're learning," I said. "That's what matters." The weeks that followed were filled with continued growth. My condo became a hub for friends, small gatherings, and quiet evenings. I started teaching an informal UX workshop for local students, sharing my knowledge and experience without expectation or obligation. Each interaction reinforced the idea that my skills, time, and energy were mine to choose how to use. Professionally, my portfolio project began gaining attention. A small startup reached out, asking to discuss potential collaboration. Another invited me to speak at a virtual design panel. Each opportunity was chosen freely, without compromise, without guilt, and without anyone else's expectations guiding my choices. By December, I had fully embraced the quiet power of autonomy. My life was no longer dictated by unseen obligations, familial pressure, or unspoken expectations. I had freedom, clarity, and a sense of self I hadn't experienced in decades. One rainy afternoon, as I sipped coffee on the balcony, I reflected on the journey, the 3 a.m. FaceTime call, the suitcase at the door, the spreadsheet, the canceled resort, and the confrontation over the mortgage all had led me here, to a life that was fully mine. I realized something profound. Independence wasn't selfishness, it wasn't abandonment, it was the courage to prioritize yourself, to set boundaries, and to demand respect for your own life. I had chosen freedom, I had chosen clarity, I had chosen myself, and in that choice I had found peace. The winter months in San Diego brought a soft chill and a quiet rhythm that perfectly matched the life I had built. My condo, now a comfortable sanctuary, felt alive with small personal touches, strings of fairy lights along the balcony railing, potted herbs thriving on the windowsill, and sketches of UX ideas scattered across my desk. The city outside continued its hum, but inside there was peace, pure, unhurried, and entirely my own. I had reached a point where life no longer revolved around fixing others' problems. Instead, I was actively shaping my own future. Mornings began with coffee and journaling, afternoons with work or small adventures around the city, and evenings with friends, quiet reflection, or experiments in design. Freedom had settled in fully, and I felt the weight of decades of obligation lift from my shoulders. By January, my professional growth was gaining momentum. The UX projects I had started months earlier were drawing attention from multiple startups. Invitations to speak at panels, provide consultations, and collaborate on independent apps had begun rolling in. It was exhilarating to see my work valued on its own merit, rather than being overshadowed by the invisible labor of unpaid financial rescues I had endured for years. One afternoon, a message popped up from a small startup I had consulted with months earlier. "Claire, your redesign has transformed our user engagement. Would you be interested in taking a permanent role with us? We'd love for you to lead our UX team." I paused before replying. In the past, I might have hesitated, torn between opportunity and obligation elsewhere. Now I felt only excitement and possibility. I responded, "Absolutely. Let's discuss details." Meanwhile, the Miller family continued their slow evolution. My mom had become adept at budgeting, tracking every expense, and even started a small side business creating homemade crafts to supplement income. Jason, working multiple shifts, had learned to manage his children's schedules and household expenses without relying on me. Even my dad, though still occasionally vocal online about perceived betrayal, was beginning to face reality quietly. I observed their progress with a detached sense of satisfaction. I had given them tools, boundaries, and opportunities to take responsibility. It was no longer my job to rescue them. Watching them navigate consequences, struggle, and adjust was oddly comforting. It meant my absence was teaching lessons they had never learned when I had been the safety net. One crisp winter morning, Emma called, "Claire, you have to come home for a week." "It's time we celebrate everything you've achieved." I laughed softly. "Home for a week, you mean London?" "Yes, and I insist. You need to reconnect with old friends, recharge, and remind yourself what it felt like to live outside your own bubble here." I considered it. Travel had always been a source of both joy and obligation, but now, with clarity and financial independence, it could be purely for pleasure. "All right," I said finally. "I'll book a flight." Returning to London was surreal. The city hadn't changed much, but I had. Walking through streets I had once navigated with constant stress and guilt now felt liberating. Cafes, bookstores, and parks became spaces for reflection rather than obligation. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during years of unpaid rescues. They welcomed me without expectation, without judgment, simply glad to have me back. One evening, Emma and I sat at our favorite cafe, sipping tea and watching the city lights flicker across the river. "You're different," she said, smiling. "You seem lighter." I smiled back. "I am. I finally stopped being everyone's crutch. I've set boundaries, reclaimed my finances, and I'm living for myself. It's terrifying and amazing all at once." While in London, I began considering long-term life plans. I wanted more than just professional growth. I wanted stability, creative fulfillment, and personal joy. I researched potential new projects, side businesses, and even considered a modest move within San Diego to a slightly larger space that could accommodate a small home office and more creative freedom. The idea of investing in property again made me pause. I had learned valuable lessons from my parents' mortgage debacle. never cosign, always protect my credit, and ensure every financial commitment directly benefited me. Every choice was deliberate, backed by research and professional advice. I wasn't just reclaiming freedom, I was safeguarding my future. Returning to San Diego, I felt renewed. The flight back had none of the stress-laden guilt I had once carried on trips to visit family. No calls demanding money, no spreadsheets waiting for me, no unspoken obligations lurking behind a cheerful greeting. The freedom was intoxicating. At home, I dedicated myself to refining my UX portfolio and continuing professional growth. I began teaching informal workshops at a local community center, sharing my knowledge with aspiring designers. The sessions were well received, and I realized that this, too, was a form of fulfillment I had neglected for years. Teaching without obligation, mentoring without guilt, it was deeply satisfying. In February, my mom sent a short text. "Claire, we're managing, slowly but we're getting there. Thank you for giving us a chance to see reality." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't anticipated. No guilt, no obligation, just acknowledgement. I replied, "Keep it up, you're learning and that's what matters." Later that month, Jason texted, "Claire, the kids are doing great. We're managing the bills. I can't thank you enough for helping us get here." I typed back, deliberately brief, "You did it yourself." That's all that counts. By spring, I was thriving professionally, personally, and emotionally. My condo had become a sanctuary of creativity, stability, and comfort. My work was fulfilling, my friendships strong, and my personal life rich with experiences I had long deferred. I reflected often on the doorway moment, the suitcase, the spreadsheet, the confrontation over the mortgage. That single act of courage had set the course for every positive change in my life. Without it, I would still be tethered to endless obligations, unrecognized labor, and the exhausting role of the silent rescuer. Now my life was my own. My time, energy, and resources belonged to me. Freedom was no longer an abstract concept. It was a daily reality I lived and protected. One afternoon, as I sipped coffee on my balcony, I looked out over the city. The soft hum of traffic, the distant waves, and the gentle breeze created a quiet symphony. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully appreciate it, the independence, the clarity, the choice. I had reclaimed my life, and nothing, not even familial pressure or guilt, could take it from me. It struck me then that real love and responsibility weren't about sacrifice at the cost of self. They were about choice, respect, and balance. I could care deeply for my family without erasing myself. I could set boundaries without feeling guilty. I could love without being consumed. And in that realization, I felt a profound sense of peace. Spring had fully arrived in San Diego. The mornings were golden, the air crisp, and the faint scent of ocean mingled with the warmth of the city. My condo, now fully settled and comfortably lived in, felt like a home for the first time ever. The couch was worn just enough to be inviting, my plants thrived on the balcony, and the small corner desk was cluttered with sketches, notes, and UX projects waiting for attention. This space wasn't just mine, it was an extension of who I had become, independent, intentional, and unbound by the expectations of anyone else. The past year had been transformative. The confrontation in the doorway, the canceled vacation, the spreadsheet, and the final mortgage decision had all set in motion a shift that I could feel every day. I had claimed my life back, and the consequences rippled outward, forcing my family to confront reality. By April, my professional work had reached a new level. The startup I had joined officially offered me a leadership role, heading their UX team. It was everything I had wanted: creative freedom, recognition for my skills, and autonomy in decision-making. I had also begun working on my personal app project, a UX-focused platform that combined design resources, tutorials, and community feedback. Each late-night coding session, each careful design iteration, reminded me that I could build something entirely on my own terms. The independence I had fought so hard to achieve wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. I no longer measured my worth by how much I could fix for someone else. I no longer carried the invisible weight of other people's financial mistakes. I was finally living for myself, and it was intoxicating. Family dynamics had continued evolving, quietly but steadily. My mom had taken on her side business full force, creating crafts and homemade goods to sell online. Jason had found a rhythm balancing shifts, parenting, and household responsibilities. The kids, Mia and Logan, were thriving in their smaller apartment, learning resilience and responsibility in ways I had never been able to teach them. One morning, I received a text from my mom. "Claire, we're doing it. Bills are paid on time. Jason is really stepping up. The kids are happy. Thank you for showing us the way." Truly, I paused, rereading the message. No guilt, no manipulation, just acknowledgement. I typed back simply, "I'm proud of you." Keep it up. By May, I began thinking about long-term plans beyond San Diego. Travel, personal projects, and experiences I had deferred for decades were suddenly possible. I mapped out a plan for visiting a few cities in Europe, inspired by my early days in London. I envisioned a summer filled with creativity, exploration, and inspiration, on my terms, without the burden of obligation to anyone else. The realization that I could build a life intentionally was exhilarating. I had spent so long living reactively, responding to emergencies, financial requests, and family crises, that the idea of choosing my own adventures felt almost revolutionary. One evening, as I sat on my balcony sipping tea, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, the 3 a.m. FaceTime call, the suitcase at the door, the spreadsheet, and the mortgage confrontation had all been terrifying at the time, but they had also been necessary. Each act of courage had chipped away at the fear and guilt that had defined my adulthood. I realized something profound: freedom wasn't just about leaving. It was about choosing consistently, day after day, to live according to your own values, priorities, and boundaries. I had done it once, and now I was doing it continuously. Professionally, my portfolio continued to gain attention. Invitations to speak at conferences, consult for other startups, and collaborate on freelance projects provided both financial stability and creative fulfillment. Each opportunity was chosen deliberately, without obligation or pressure. I was finally being valued for my skills, creativity, and insight, not for the invisible labor of funding someone else's lifestyle. Personal life flourished alongside professional growth. Friends from London visited, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. Weekend hikes, evening gallery walks, and small dinner parties became a regular rhythm. Each interaction reinforced the reality that relationships could exist without manipulation, without guilt, and without debt as a hidden tether. Summer arrived fully, bringing long, bright days and the freedom to explore. I booked a trip to London, this time not to confront obligations, but to revisit a city I loved and reconnect with old friends. Walking along the Thames, sipping tea in quiet cafes, and revisiting neighborhoods that had once felt like home, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had reclaimed my life. I had created boundaries, I had chosen myself. Returning to San Diego after the trip, I felt renewed and inspired. My condo felt even more like home, my projects more alive, and my sense of self stronger than ever. The path I had carved for myself, through courage, documentation, and firm boundaries, was paying off in ways I hadn't fully imagined. In September, I received an unexpected email from Jason. "Claire, we've been doing well, bills are stable, kids are happy. Mom says thank you, we're learning to live responsibly. I know we can't repay everything, but I wanted you to know that your actions changed us. Truly, thanks." I reread the email slowly, feeling a quiet satisfaction. I replied simply, "You did it yourselves, that's all that matters." It was the culmination of months of watching them struggle, adjust, and grow. I had given them tools, but I had not enabled dependency. They had learned to navigate consequences, and I had learned to fully step into my own life. By winter, my life had reached a steady, deliberate pace. The condo was cozy with lights strung along the balcony, my personal projects were flourishing, and my professional work was fulfilling and respected. My family continued to adjust to their new reality, managing bills, responsibilities, and parenting without me. The tension that had once defined every interaction had evaporated, replaced by distant, quiet acknowledgement. I spent Christmas in my own home, preparing a small meal, hanging a modest tree, and enjoying the first holiday season in decades without guilt, stress, or invisible obligations. The peace was profound, the freedom was complete. Sitting in my living room that Christmas Eve, I realized that independence had not been just about money or confrontation or canceling payments. It had been about choosing consistently to prioritize myself, to set boundaries, and to demand respect for my life. I had done that, and in doing so, I had found peace, clarity, and joy. I reflected on the journey, the 3 a.m. FaceTime call, the suitcase, the spreadsheet, the canceled resort, the mortgage confrontation, and the months of boundary setting and professional growth. Every difficult decision, every moment of fear had led to this life, a life I had chosen, nurtured, and protected, I realized finally that real freedom wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, deliberate, and persistent. It was built on courage, consistency, and self-respect, and it was permanent. As the night deepened, I sipped my hot chocolate, watched the city lights flicker, and allowed myself to fully feel the weightlessness of a life reclaimed. The past, with all its obligations, guilt, and hidden labor, no longer controlled me. My family was on their own, learning lessons I had long tried to teach through sacrifice. And I finally was free to live fully, intentionally, and joyfully. That night, as I sat cross-legged on the floor beside my modest Christmas tree, I realized something vital. Independence was not abandonment. It was love for yourself, for your future, and for the life you wanted to build. And for the first time, I felt entirely, profoundly, and irrevocably at peace.